I had an opinion piece published in the Providence Journal over the weekend on Sunday, if you saw it, having to do with green energy, the latest, well, not the latest, the longest, I should say the longest running and probably most successful deception the left ever put out. And now the newest thing is everybody needs to be driving electric vehicles. So we're going to be exploring both in my opening commentary here in just a minute and with our very special guest, Alex Epstein. If you don't know who Alex is, he is the world's foremost expert and philosopher when it comes to climate change, when it comes to energy, when it comes to fossil fuels. I can easily say he's the world's foremost advocate or most well-known and well-quoted and most interviewed advocate when it comes to promoting fossil fuels and why they're not so dangerous and why they actually have been a major benefit to humanity, to the flourishing of humanity. It's time for Rhode Island lawmakers to face reality. Now, as I explained in my opinion piece, the reality is we have chosen as a state to follow California's emission standards, the California Air Resources Board, CARB, not coincidentally named. And right now, they are proposing a ban on the sale of gasoline-powered cars by the middle of next decade. Now, states either can choose to follow California standards or federal standards. Federal standards are a lot less. Federal standards say 2/3 of all cars sold by 2032, by early next decade, must be electric, where California says 100% of vehicle sales must be electric by the middle of next decade. But even the lesser, less restrictive, less onerous, less oppressive federal standards, even the radical environmentalists, the hardcore climate change believers, global warming believers, even they at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, are saying, you know what, even our 2/3 mandate by 2032 is not achievable. It's just not achievable, and we're going to backtrack. So very soon, we're expecting the EPA to come out with new standards. Connecticut, just at the end of last year, November, I think, maybe December, the governor, faced with the reality, lawmakers we're going to vote. We're not going to support his push. Connecticut said we're not going to follow California's much more strict emission standards anymore. It's just not realistic to think we can do so. It's going to harm our people too much for no benefit, and the goals are unachievable. We don't have enough electricity on the grid to power all these cars. So the federal EPA is backtracking. Connecticut is backtracking out of the, if you would, the multi-state coalition along with California. It's now time for Rhode Island to follow the lead of the federal EPA and Connecticut and to step away. You are the world's preeminent promoter and advocate of fossil fuels. It's not that you're against green energy, but you're a promoter of fossil fuels. Ellen sent me this book 7 years ago. I read it, and then I become an Alex Epstein fan. Tell us about the moral case for fossil fuels.
Sure. I think it's a good point that it's not primarily against other things. It's for fossil fuels, but really what it's for is energy that's cost effective and scalable. So both of those are important. So cost effective, I mean affordable. So typical person can afford to use a lot of it. Reliable, it's available when needed and the quantity needed. And then it's versatile. It can power every type of machine. Most machines in the world are not powered by electricity. They're powered by other forms of energy, usually directly burning fossil fuels, like for transportation or heat, because that's the only way to do it cost effectively, or the most cost effective way to do it. And then it needs to be scalable, available to billions of people in thousands of places. Because if you're really focused on human flourishing, you look at both positives and negatives. It's just focused on. It's just
you have to look at the cost versus benefit analysis. Right. You have to look at that, but everybody only looks at one side of this whole thing.
And so part of it, and this goes to a discussion I have in my book, Fossil Future, in chapter 3, you have to start asking if people who should know better are only looking at one side of it. They're only looking at negative side effects. Like, what's going on? And my argument, a big argument of mine for the knowledgeable people, not ignorant people just don't know, but the knowledgeable people, is what's going on is they're not really concerned about negatives on humans. They're concerned with what they would call negatives on the planet. But negatives on the planet, from their perspective, is just human impact. And so their basic view is that human impact is an immoral force in the world. They think of the perfect planet as one that has little to no human impact. And so they just think it's wrong for us to impact Earth. And the core moral premise of my work in energy and environmental and industrial issues is it is good to impact the planet insofar as it advances human flourishing. And most of the time, it's good because it does impact human flourishing for the better.
Especially when that good can be achieved with such reliability, abundance, and low cost, right?
Well, that's part of the good, is that everyone gets to use machines to overcome all the natural deficiencies and dangers of Earth, which is not a good place to live for the average person at any point throughout its history until very recently, until we figured out how to empower ourselves with machines to overcome our natural weakness and to overcome the inhospitability of the planet.
Rhode Island boasts, our lawmakers boast, our governor, our speaker, our Senate president, all the activists boast that Rhode Island is set to be the first state to set a goal of zero net carbon emissions by 2040 or 2050 or some ridiculous item like that. That's our public policy in this state right now. It's all from, and then we had this Act on Climate bill a few years ago. When you look at these green energy targets, and you said it earlier, and I said it, you're not an opponent of green energy. It's just that you can't rely on it right now. But when you look at these green energy mandates and standards and goals, Alex Epstein says what?
If you have to imagine my filter, which is a very strong awareness that there's nothing close to fossil fuels right now and for the foreseeable future in terms of cost effectiveness and scalability, then the net zero commitment just sounds to me like, oh, Rhode Island is vowing to be really energy poor, really poor, and dramatically decrease the life expectancy of its citizens in a short amount of time. So it's the opposite of an aspiration. It's just an economic and literal death sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a suicide pact, right?
Yeah, of course. And you would think like what you would want for Rhode Island. I mean, it's not like Rhode Island is, Rhode Island, I would imagine, I mean, I've been there and I like it. It's obviously a very small state and it's not super well known. Like you would like leadership of Rhode Island to say, hey, you know what? We're gonna sort of be like Singapore, right? We're gonna just totally stand out. We're gonna be an energy leader. We're gonna be incredibly prosperous. You're gonna hear about amazing manufacturing coming from Rhode Island. Maybe a way that's less apparent to people is that the key with science is it always needs to serve objective thinking. And with environmental issues, as you mentioned, there's always this cost benefit analysis. So when you're looking at it, doesn't matter whether you're looking at air pollution or CO2 emissions or something like that, you always, to use the terminology of our environmental agencies, you need to look at, okay, what are the benefits of reducing emissions by a given amount and like have real health science there? And then what are the costs? And in general, what they want to do is they only want to focus on the benefits of constraining, say, fossil fuels, and they don't want to look at the costs. And so to get around that cost benefit discussion, they just call anyone who challenges them a science denier. Whereas in reality, they're science deniers, A, because they don't look at cost, which is completely anti-scientific.
Yeah, that's
B,
an objective analysis, right?
Yeah, and B, if you look at benefits, like you look at what the EPA does, it is criminal how they inflate benefits.
All right, I had a op-ed, as it turns out, just published this past Sunday in the Providence
nice.
Journal. And it's gotten some pretty good play. And as I mentioned earlier, Rhode Island is on track to follow California's rule to ban the sale of gasoline-powered vehicles and force people to buy more expensive, less reliable electric vehicles. You've been promoting a concept called, the case for electric vehicle freedom. Talk about electric vehicles, electric vehicle mandates, and that whole issue.
It's just kind of like if someone came out with a new kind of phone, right? You would say, okay, well, if your phone is good, then sell it to people, offer it on the market and see what happens. We seem to lose sight of this with energy, that there's such a thing as freedom and consumer choice and producer competition. These are very time-tested dynamics for good reason.
Yeah,
And
kind
so
of built our country, didn't they? Those
yeah,
dynamics.
built the prosperity of it. And so what you have with EVs that should be a red flag for people is that supposedly they're superior, and yet they need to be forced on us. So you look at what Biden has been trying to do with the EPA, trying to get one half to two-thirds of us to forcibly buy EVs, by the early 2030s, right? So just this huge scale up of this stuff. And the reason they're coercing it is because it's not actually in the interest of most Americans to buy. And there are two basic reasons for this. One is they're still not the most cost-effective option for most people, because there's the cost of them, which is still quite high, but there's also the effectiveness. They have issues with range, they have issues with charge time. People, we were just buying a family car, and we think about it. My wife is particularly concerned. Hey, I don't want something that I have to go to a charge that I'm not sure if we can go on a long trip with. People are like, I have no opposition to EVs. I'd be willing to
Right.
get one if it were
They're
just
great
as
cars. Yeah.
but they're limited. They lack some of the functionality of the cars we're used to.
But they also don't solve climate change potential crisis, right?
We could talk about that, but that's not my main concern, because I don't think having a slightly warmer planet is a crisis.
Right.
But
Okay, got it.
but the other thing, the thing that is a crisis, so there's the issue of you're forcing people to use things that aren't cost effective, and that's obviously going to hurt the middle class and especially the poor most of all, because they're going to either have inferior mobility or lack of mobility. But the kind of worst thing for everyone is we're putting enormous pressure, demand pressure on a grid that is already very supply constrained. So if you look at, say, national, like the Reliability Corporation of NERC, what's called NERC, they are warning about, insufficient electricity throughout the country, all over the place. We're having shortages and shortages because people are trying to shut down reliable fossil fuel and nuclear plants and then replace them with unreliable solar and wind. And we're getting warnings even from the government, who's not warning about it enough. They're warning about it. And then we're going to put way more demand. So we artificially decrease the supply of electricity, artificially increase demand for electricity. That is a crisis that is in process right now.
Right. We've talked about how California, Governor Newsom himself said, hey, if you have an electric vehicle, don't charge it. This was like 15 months ago when there were 18 months ago when they going through a heat wave. They didn't have enough electricity on the grid. And they said, hey, please don't charge
I was there.
Right.
I was there.
DeSantis
pointed that out in that debate that they had, which is a really good point. 6 days after you say no more, everyone's got to use an EV, it said, oh, don't charge your electric car. And by the way, they also say, don't use your air conditioning during summer. Like, this is life under these guys.
Alex, and thank you for your time today. I'd like you to give you as much time as you like. Speak to Rhode Island lawmakers about the electric vehicle mandate tied to CARB, about their net zero carbon emissions policy, which would force 100% green energy resources on the people of this state in the next 20 years or so. Talk directly to lawmakers. What is the realistic approach they should take towards energy policy?
So the current approach you're taking is an approach of punishing Rhode Island to achieve symbolism. Right, that's the current approach, right? So I mentioned why I think it's a death sentence to do all these things. It's important, though, that it is important, particularly insofar as you're concerned about CO2 type issues, that it is symbolic, right? Because the world is not going to follow Rhode Island. Rhode Island is a tiny user of energy. The nation isn't even going to follow Rhode Island, but certainly the world isn't going to follow our nation insofar as we self-sacrificially sabotage our energy. Look at China. China has 300 plus new coal plants in the pipeline. That's way more than we even have total right now in the US, right? So the world is generally going to pursue energy that's cost effective and scalable. If you are trying to be a leader in lowering emissions, the one and only thing you can do that matters and that is good. You could kill yourself, but that is bad, and you could ruin your people's lives. That's bad, and that's not going to scale anyway.
That's not human flourishing, is it?
Yeah, right. But the one and only thing you can do is you can innovate in alternatives. And the way you can innovate in alternatives is you create an incredibly good political environment, including, by the way, very low cost energy, so that people can innovate. So if I were running new, and I'm happy to help with this, I advise hundreds of politicians at this time. I will help you with, you should try to become a leader in nuclear and basically say, hey, Rhode Island is going to be a new place where we are going to be a pioneer in nuclear energy. and we are going to demand that the federal government give us freedom to experiment this. We're going to become a hotbed for this in the good sense of the term, right? We're going to be the place where energy innovation happens, and then just get rid of all that other crap, which is just going to ruin people's lives and accomplish nothing. And then that way you'll be a much more prosperous state, and you actually have a shot at doing something by your professed goal. But right now you are just ruining everyone's lives, or you're planning to, and it's just symbolism. So why would you want to go out as somebody who just ruined everything and accomplished nothing by any standard except for the standard of human misery? So my email is alex@alexepstein.com. If you're a lawmaker, feel free to contact me, and I'll help you do the right thing.
I mean, Alex, what you just said is complete common sense, but yet these false narratives from the left continue to rule the day, continue to dominate the thinking of lawmakers. Have you found a way to break through these narratives with facts and common sense?
I mean, I work with a lot of lawmakers. I mean, my basic policy is I'll work with anyone of any party. They just have to be open to doing what I think is the right thing, which is ultimately what I call energy freedom. So I am finding a lot of success persuading people. And I would say to your audience, if you want success as well, check out, I have an Energy Talking Points newsletter. So alexepstein.substack.com. There's an Energy Talking Points newsletter.
Alex@alexepstein.com. Is that what it was?
Well, yeah, the newsletter is alexepstein.substack.com. And then, yeah, my email is alex@alexepstein.com. Right. And in particular, I'm eager for any politicians to email me if you want to make Rhode Island have a good future instead of copying the bad future of your neighbors.
You are the world's foremost advocate for fossil fuels like me. Hey, when green energy is market friendly and ready for prime time, we're all for it. But for now, we've got to pull off this voodoo hex that everybody's been putting on fossil fuels, and you have explained it better than anybody I've ever heard of. So Alex Epstein, thank you for joining me here in the dugout.